General Audience number 26 of April 30th, 1980. Part 2. The Man of Concupiscence. In our last reflection, we said that Christ's words in the Sermon on the Mount directly refer to reductive desire, born immediately in the human heart. Indirectly, however, these words help us to understand a truth about man that is of universal importance. This truth about historical man, which is of universal importance, and toward which Christ's words in Matthew chapter 5, verse 27 to 28 direct us, seems to be expressed in the biblical teaching about the threefold concupiscence. We are referring here to the concise statement of 1 John. Quote, all that is in the world, the concupiscence of the flesh, the concupiscence of the eyes, and the pride of life, comes not from the Father, but from the world. And the world passes away with its concupiscence. But the one who does the will of God will remain in eternity. 1 John chapter 2, verses 16 and 17. It is evident that to understand these words, one must carefully take into account the context in which they are inserted. That is, the context of Johannine theology as a whole, about which so much has been written. The same words, however, take their place in the context of the whole Bible. They belong to the whole of revealed truth about man and are important for the theology of the body. They do not explain concupiscence itself in its threefold form, because they seem to presuppose that, quote, the concupiscence of the flesh, the concupiscence of the eyes, and the pride of life are in some way a clear and well-known concept. Yet they do explain the coming to be of the threefold concupiscence by indicating its origin, not from the Father, but from the world. The concupiscence of the flesh, and together with it, the concupiscence of the eyes and the pride of life, is in the world, and at the same time comes from the world, not as a fruit of the mystery of creation, but as a fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. See Genesis chapter 2, verse 17, in man's heart. What bears fruit in the threefold concupiscence is not the world created by God for man, whose underlying goodness we read about several times in Genesis chapter 1. God saw that it was good, that it was very good. In the threefold concupiscence, what bears fruit by contrast is the breaking of the first covenant with the Creator, with God Elohim, with God Yahweh. This covenant was broken in man's heart. Here, one would have to carry out a careful analysis of the events described in Genesis chapter 3, verses 1 through 6. However, we are referring only in general to the mystery of sin, to the beginnings of human history. In fact, it is only as a consequence of sin, as a fruit of the breaking of the covenant with God in the human heart, in man's innermost being, that the world of Genesis became the world of the Johannine words. 1 John 2, 15 to 16, the place and source of concupiscence. Thus, the statement according to which concupiscence does not come from the Father, but from the world, seems to direct us once more to the biblical beginning. The coming to be of the threefold concupiscence presented by John finds in this beginning its first and fundamental clarification, an explanation essential for the theology of the body. To understand this truth contained in Christ's words in the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5, verses 27 to 28, which is of universal importance for historical man, we must return once more to Genesis. Linger once more on the threshold of the revelation of historical man. This is all the more necessary, inasmuch as this threshold of the history of salvation proves to be at the same time a threshold of authentic human experiences, as we will point out in the following analyses. This same fundamental meaning that we drew from the foregoing analyses will come to life again as the constitutive elements of an adequate anthropology and a deep substratum of the theology of the body. The question may still be raised whether it is legitimate to transfer the typical contents of Johannine theology found in 1 John as a whole, especially in 1 John 2, verses 15 to 16, to the terrain of the Sermon on the Mount according to Matthew, and specifically to Christ's statement taken from Matthew 5, 27 to 28, "You have heard that it was said, 'You shall not commit adultery,' but I say to you, whoever looks at a woman to desire her has already committed adultery with her in his heart." We will return to this subject several times. Nevertheless, we appeal right away to the overall biblical context, to the whole of the truth about man that is revealed and expressed in it. It is precisely in the name of this truth that we attempt to achieve a thorough, in-depth understanding of the man whom Christ indicates in the text of Matthew chapter 5, verses 27 to 28, namely the man who looks at a woman to desire her. In such a look, in the end, not explained by the fact that this man is precisely a man of desire in the sense of 1 John, or rather that both, namely the man who looks to desire lustfully and the woman who is the object of such a look, find themselves in the dimension of the threefold concupiscence that does not come from the Father but from the world. One must therefore understand what that concupiscence is, or rather who that man of desire is, in order to discover the depth of the words of Christ according to Matthew 5, 27 to 28, and to explain what the reference to the human heart means, which is so important for the theology of the body. Section A, the meaning of original shame, casting doubt on the gift. Let us turn afresh to the Yahwist account, in which the same man, male and female, appears at the beginning as the man of original innocence before original sin, and then as the one who has lost this innocence by breaking the original covenant with his Creator. We do not intend in this place to carry out a complete analysis of the temptation and of sin according to the text of Genesis chapter 3, 1 through 5 itself, the relevant teaching of the church and of theology. It should only be observed that the biblical description itself seems to highlight particularly the key moment in which, in man's heart, doubt is cast on the gift. The man who picks the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil makes at the same time a fundamental choice and carries it through against the will of the Creator, God Yahweh, by accepting the motivation suggested by the tempter. You will not die at all. Rather, God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will become like God, knowing good and evil. According to some ancient translations, you will be like gods, knowing good and evil. This motivation clearly implies casting doubt on the gift and on love, from which creation takes its origin as gift. As for man, he receives the world as a gift, and at the same time the image of God, that is, humanity itself, in all the truth of its male and female duality. It is enough to read carefully the whole passage of Genesis chapter 3, verse 1 through 5, to grasp the mystery of man in it who turns his back on the Father, even if we do not find this name of God in the account. By casting doubt in his heart on the deepest meaning of the gift, that is, on love, as the specific motive of creation and of the original covenant, see Genesis chapter 3, verse 5, man turns his back on God, love, on the Father. He, in some sense, casts him from his heart. At the same time, therefore, he detaches his heart and cuts it off, as it were, from that which comes from the Father. In this way, what is left in him is what comes from the world. Quote, then the eyes of both were opened, and they realized that they were naked. They sewed fig leaves together and made themselves loincloths. Genesis chapter 3, verse 7. This is the first sentence of the Yahwist account about man's situation after sin. And it shows the new state of human nature. Does not this sentence also suggest the beginning of concupiscence in man's heart? To answer this question more deeply and thoroughly, we cannot stop at that first sentence, but must reread the text as a whole. It is, however, worth recalling here what was said in the first analyses about the subject of shame as a limit experience. See above, TOB 11, 1 through audience number 13, 1. Genesis refers to this experience to show the boundary that runs between man's state of original innocence, see Genesis, especially Genesis chapter 2, verse 25, to which we devoted much attention in the foregoing analyses, and his state of sinfulness at the very beginning. While Genesis chapter 2, verse 25 underlines that they were naked but did not feel shame, Genesis chapter 3, verse 7 speaks explicitly about the birth of shame in connection with sin. That shame is, as it were, the first source of the manifestation in man, in both the man and the woman, of what does not come from the Father, but from the world.